You count on us for Indigenous music and stories. Now, Native Voice One, Native America Calling, and National Native News are counting on you. Our campaign is happening now through June 30th. Please donate today to empower Indigenous-led media and ensure Native stories continue to be heard. Thank you.
Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Congress just passed an extensive bill intended to improve housing affordability, but Native housing advocates say it doesn't include the Principal Housing Program for tribes. The Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act, known as NAHASDA, is an integral resource for housing construction and accessibility in Indian country. It hasn't been updated in more than a decade, and Native housing quality and quantity is suffering as a result. We're back after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Jill Freitas. It's billed as the world's longest and toughest snow machine race. Next year, the Iron Dog race plans to add 3 checkpoints to its over 2,000-mile course. As KOTZ's Desiree Hagen reports, a new race route, announced earlier this month, has been several years in the making and crosses through 2 national wildlife refuges.
The new route adds the communities of Huslia, Shugnak, and Ambler. Rick Paquette is the executive director of the Iron Dog. He says it won't add miles, but would traverse through new terrain.
This isn't something like overnight that happened, you know what I mean? This was over 7 years in the making. This is a really big deal, and we're super excited to do this.
The proposed route passes through federally protected land, more than 100 miles of it, through the Koyukuk and Selawik National Wildlife Refuges. Both refuges rejected the initial request, stating that the race would be a public safety problem, require more budget and staff than are available, and doesn't align with the refuge's purpose or mission. A letter from Selawik Wildlife Refuge said that a portion of the proposed route would also violate ANILCA, the Wilderness Act, and the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. The managers of the refuges were unavailable for comment. Iron Dog appealed the rejections in June 2025 and reached out to Senator Dan Sullivan's office. A press release from the senator said he and his team played a key role in advancing the new route and drafted an appeal that, quote, highlighted inconsistencies, preventing the route's expansion.
Anytime you have a bunch of different organizations that you're trying to collaborate with and get one final answer on, it's extremely difficult. You know, new administrations and definitely, Senator Sullivan's office really helped push this over and help us.
Paquette says Sullivan's office helped with letters of support and with multiple organizations, including the Bureau of Land Management. And it paid off. In December, Regional Director of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Sarah Borio, overturned the previous denials, allowing for the new race routes. Borio's office did not respond to questions from KOTZ News. Paquette says there's challenges with a race this large, which passes through 23 mostly remote checkpoints.
I mean, it's a beast to put on this race logistically, and there's always struggles with fuel and getting equipment out and getting, resources out there.
Both Ambler and Shugnak have experienced prolonged fuel shortages in the last several years, often in winter when storms can ground fuel planes. Still, Paquette says Iron Dog is prepared for those challenges.
We do our best to make sure we get all the resources to the communities that we need to put on a strong race.
Paquette says Iron Dog has several programs that the new race communities will benefit from, including free helmets and free life jackets for local youth. Last year, Iron Dog established the Iron Pup program, which fosters young racers. Iron Dog also founded the Make It Run program that partners with schools and engineers to encourage technical and mechanical training. Paquette says there's also economic benefits to the new communities.
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's going to be publicity. There's going to be people going through these areas. we send resources up there, spending money and giving, a chance for these folks to see this incredible race.
The Iron Dog race typically begins in early February. A date has not been set for next year's race. Reporting from Kotzebue, I'm Desiree Hagen.
And I'm Jill Freitas.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support for law and justice-related programming provided by Hobbs, Strauss, Dean & Walker, LLP, a national law firm dedicated to promoting and defending tribal rights for over 40 years. More information available at hobbsstrauss.com.
Hear that? Tribal college faculty do so much, one can't say it all here. Nothing but respect. Visit mostthoroughdescription.com. The American Indian College Fund supports this program.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Sweeping legislation just approved by Congress promises to lower the cost of housing across the country. The 21st Century Road to Housing Act sailed through both houses with overwhelming bipartisan support. It offers no new money for housing construction, but among other priorities, it aims to streamline the housing construction process. While housing experts tout the bill's benefits, Native American affordable housing advocates say it is a missed opportunity to address long-standing issues faced by a population disproportionately affected by high housing costs and regulatory hurdles. They continue to push for the reauthorization of the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act, the program driving the construction and repair of thousands of homes in Native communities over the last 3 decades. It expired more than a dozen years ago, although Congress continues to fund NAHASDA. Its programs have not been authorized since 2013. We're going to hear about what experts say is needed to improve Native home affordability today. We'll also hear later about a discrepancy in how one county assesses Native homelessness. Listeners can join us by calling 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Joining us now from Juneau, Alaska is Jackie Peda. She is the president and CEO of the Tlingit and Haida Regional Housing Authority. She is also the first vice president of the Central Council of the Tlingit and Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska, co-chair of the HUD Secretary's Tribal Intergovernmental Advisory Committee, and a board member of the National American Indian Housing Council. She is, of course, Tlingit. Jackie, good morning, and welcome back to Native America Calling.
Thank you. Good morning to you.
Thank you. Joining us from the lands of the Pokagon Potawatomi near South Bend, Indiana, is Lenny Fine-Day. He is the general counsel for the National Congress of American Indians and a member of the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe. Lenny, hello, and welcome back to NAC.
Yes, good morning, Sean. Thanks for having me today.
You bet. And joining us from Anchorage, Alaska, is Griffin Hagel Forster. He is the executive director of the Association of Alaska Housing Authorities. Griffin, good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Sean. Great to join you today.
It's great to have you on the show, Griffin, along with our other guests. And Jackie, I want to start with you. This bill just passed by Congress, touted as the biggest federal affordable housing legislation in decades, passed overwhelmingly through a deeply divided Congress, although a bill signing ceremony at the White House was canceled today. How big a step toward housing affordability is this?
Well, I think it was a huge step that in this environment right now with housing challenges by not just Indian country, nationwide, that Congress, put together a bill and got it passed as expeditiously as they did. But the problem is, it didn't include like the NAHASDA modernization things that we've been asking for quite a while. And so, although that creates opportunities for us to participate in a variety of new programs that, as you mentioned earlier, haven't been funded by Congress, are just authorized. The Congress still has to appropriate the funds for a lot of these provisions that are in the bill. It doesn't fix the things that we needed to fix with our own Native American housing programs.
Jackie, what does this mean for NAHASDA then, with its status now still undecided after this bill?
Well, we want to say, and as we were saying during this whole process, is that, we support national housing legislation, but don't move forward without us. I think our rally cry, needs to be very loud and consistent now, saying that we need the NAHASDA Modernization Act, that if this nation is going to address its housing crisis, let's make sure that Indian country is not left behind. And so I think that's a good rally for us. And I know that the sponsors on both the House and the Senate of our various versions of the bills, they coordinated with each other. They drafted the bills so that there's some consistency between language. They're ready to move forward, and we just need to make sure that Congress continues the momentum on wanting to address housing crisis in America and include Indian country.
Jackie, aside from the uncertainty with NAHASDA, are there other features in the bill that will benefit Indian country that you'd like to talk about?
Sure. So, in the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, there were one good thing overall within the bill. There was a recognition that tribes needed to be included like states and having access to these programs. And so you'll see that throughout, like tribes under the new programs that are pilot programs that are being put forward, like the Whole Home Repairs Act and, the Build Housing Act. A number of those provisions all recognize tribes. Some of the challenges are going to be the mechanics of methodologies of determining, there's some barriers in how we'll, in the application process, what are the metrics that are necessary to be able to demonstrate need. We need to make sure that it references tribal specific areas. There was one of the really good things in there was the Price Act, which is in Section 304, the Manufactured Housing Communities kind of section. The Price Act was a program that had already put forward, and we worked very closely. Indian country worked very closely with CBPD in developing the NOFO for that, and this actually permanentizes that program. And so that's a good example of HUD working closely with the tribes to make sure that we had access to the program, but also that the grant process recognizes some of the uniquenesses in Indian country. So I think those are some good examples of, I like that in the bill, they were trying to address things like environmental streamlining, which is something that we've included extensively in our NAHASDA Modernization Act, and that's what we're actually calling our Reauthorization Act, is the NAHASDA Modernization Act, to bring it to that next level. So, those are some of the important things in there. I think it's also good that it recognizes that, through with the lead-based paint and healthy homes programs, it actually recognizes that tribes and TDHEs can do their own environmental review, something that we've been able to do for a long time under the ONAP programs, the Office of Native American Programs. And so extending that to other programs outside of ONAP was a good step forward.
Jackie, going back to NAHASDA, would you say that it has been abandoned, or would you say it's been ignored? And why, again, no update in 13 years? What's behind that?
We've tried to move forward, and I think, to be realistic, there's been a couple of barriers, and those are not barriers from Indian country, and it's not barriers from lack of us rallying together and being supportive. It's challenges, political challenges in Congress, and we've tried to address them mainly on the House side year after year. The Senate side has passed a NAHASDA Reauthorization Act, but we haven't been able to get through on the House side. The difference this time is that on the House side, we have Representative Troy Downing from Montana and Representative Janelle Bynum from Oregon, who are the primary sponsors. all of the committee chairs have been our sponsors on the House side. We have Tom Cole, who is, as we all know, he's a champion, but he has really rallied for housing and to try to make this happen. He's had conversations with Flood, Representative Flood, who is the chair of the overall committee, to try to get a hearing scheduled. And, you know, I think we really have the momentum to make it happen. So we don't want Congress to feel like we got a housing piece of legislation through, that's enough. We want to feel like we got a piece of housing legislation through, we can get Nahasda modernization done now too. And that's what we're trying to keep pushing for.
Jackie, you mentioned environmental streamlining, giving tribes more authority with regard to their own environmental reviews. Can you give us an example of how some of these older policies and rules in Nahasda hindered housing projects, delayed construction, made housing less accessible, and how could it be improved going forward, provided, Nahasda can be addressed here at the federal level soon?
So, and thank you, because the Nahasda Modernization Act is packed with those kinds of recommendations. The Secretary's Tribal Advisory Committee and NAIC went through old bills and other recommendations and pulled out key provisions. So things that didn't make sense. We had a barrier in the Indian Community Development Block Grant program that said you had to be a CDBO to be able to develop residential housing. How crazy is that? Why would we have any barriers put in place about developing residential housing when that's the number one priority in Indian country? That removes that barrier. There's also requirements with HUD regarding counseling services and counseling programs that was put in a bill and it wasn't implemented. It was in the Dodd-Frank bill years ago, and it was an oversight within HUD, and now they're needing to enforce that. And this what basically said that when you have federal, HUD programs, you have to have a counseling program in place, et cetera. And we're saying, let's not make that mandatory. Let's make that optional. Allow tribes the flexibility to do that. But there's a number of other kinds of things like I said, with the streamlining environmental review. It was a good example when I took the secretary, we were up in Alaska this last year, and here they were, you could see in the line of sight, there's oil tanks storage tanks. Well, in the environmental review says you can't have it within so many, miles within the line of sight. And I said, you know what, to the secretary, this wouldn't be eligible in the environmental review the way it's now. And these are small villages. That's just a good example of how absurd some of those are.
All right. Thank you so much for kicking off our conversation today, Jackie Pejda. Short break, and we'll be right back to continue the conversation. First Nations leaders are taking on the leaders of Alberta over that province's official push to separate from the country of Canada. There are legal conflicts and heated verbal exchanges as Indigenous representatives say they will do everything in their power to fight separation. We'll hear more on the next Native America Calling.
Who protects Indian country? Amerind does. As the only 100% tribally owned insurance carrier, Amerind helps strengthen tribal communities by providing reliable insurance coverage and keeping dollars in Indian country. From property and liability to commercial auto and tribal workers' compensation, Amerind is here to protect what matters. Celebrating 40 years of serving Indian country. Learn more at amerind.com. That's AMERIND.com.
Thank you for listening to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce, and we're talking about affordable housing today. What are the housing needs and challenges in your community? Can you secure a home site and obtain a home loan? Is it easy to build a new house or renovate an existing one? Let us know by calling 1-800-996-2848. You can also chime in by telling us about any new housing developments in your community. Once again, that number, 1-800-99-NATIVE. Our next guest, Lenny Finde, is the General Counsel for the National Congress of American Indians. And Lenny, we heard from Jackie Peta earlier. Give us a rundown on the challenges facing Najasda going forward. I want to ask you, what's the current housing need for Indian country right now?
Thanks, Sean. I just want to start first by thanking Jackie for her many years of advocacy and her continued leadership in this space and in so many other places with Indian country. It's just great and refreshing to hear that, and I really appreciated all the information that she shared earlier. And so to your question about where is Indian country at right now with housing is, the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act, Najasda, was enacted 30 years ago, in 1996. And it was reauthorized every 5 years since then. Up until 2008 was the last time it was reauthorized, and it expired in 2013. And so Congress has been funding it, as you said at the open of the show, through the appropriations process, even though the programs haven't necessarily been authorized in the Najasda legislation itself since 2013. And just to put a real life example on that, in 2007, that was when the first iPhone came out, was 2007. So imagine that
I remember.
We're still using, we're trying to take a picture or use an app from that first iPhone today, so many years later. And we can see, it might work, but it's not great. It doesn't fit the times we're in right now. It doesn't fit the need where we're at right now. And that's what we find ourselves. That's an analogy for where we find ourselves with housing in Indian country, is that we have the programs that are in place that Congress is funding were created in 2008, and there hasn't been any modernization to it since then. And so that's why we're pushing really hard with this, with the Modernization Act of 2026. Like Jackie said, it is Najasda reauthorization, but we're really emphasizing that modernization component because we really need to see the need. It's self-determination for tribal communities, and so this one size trickle down fits everybody. Like that approach just doesn't work in Indian country. We see that and we know that, and so we're trying to update the way that decisions are made and recognize that each tribe has their own specific needs as it relates to housing, and provide those tribes the flexibility that they need to meet those needs and actually fulfill that trust responsibility that the federal government owes to Indian country.
Lenny, I like your analogy of using an old dated iPhone. If you knew how old my phone is that I'm holding right now in my hand, I think you'd be shaking your head because I'm pretty old school. But what about the argument that Najasda is a trust responsibility? Do members of Congress think of it that way?
I sure hope they do. I know that's the work that NCAI and other national organizations are doing on a regular basis, is to remind them that there is a legal fiduciary responsibility that's been recognized by the Supreme Court time and time again, and it goes back to the Constitution and Article 6 of the Supremacy Clause, that the treaties that the United States enters into are the supreme law of the land, and the treaties that the United States entered into with Indian tribes throughout history created the foundation for that trust obligation, that fiduciary responsibility that is the highest level of responsibility that a decision maker can have for another. And so I do believe that there are members of Congress that understand that and get that. But I also know that there's more education that needs to be done so that there are members that aren't fully aware of what that fiduciary trust responsibility is. But that's the work that NCAI is engaged in with our partner organizations and others in Indian country to make sure that message is getting out there.
What's the strategy now to get members of Congress to get the bill moving?
Oh, I think that Jackie hit the nail on the head pretty well there. One of the things that I want to emphasize is the bipartisan nature in the House right now, and the number of co-sponsors that have signed on to the legislation. And so we're doing everything we can. The National Congress of American Indians, we just had our mid-year convention last week in Memphis, Tennessee. And at that convention, we considered an emergency resolution on the NAHASDA modernization and reauthorization. And that resolution was unanimously enacted, urging Congress to swiftly enact the legislation. And so since that just got through NCAI last week, we are going to be working with our allies on the Hill to make sure that that message is getting out there. And I think, just to dovetail off of what Jackie said, really, we got this big sort of housing bill through. That's great. Now let's not rest on our laurels. Let's get the Modernization Act across the finish line so that we can reauthorize these programs actually get them updated so that we're meeting the needs of Indian country. And so there is a bipartisan approach here. I know, as usual, there are political hurdles that we're going to have to overcome. And unfortunately, those political hurdles don't even necessarily directly relate to housing. But we're going to be out there explaining really what the need is for this. And one of the big things that I know we're doing this time is we have a lot more data this time, thanks to what we saw with the COVID pandemic, and how the pandemic really brought to light, the crisis in Indian country as it relates to housing. And so we're going to be utilizing that as we're educating members of Congress.
Lenny, speaking of political hurdles, what can you tell us about President Trump canceling the bill signing ceremony that was scheduled for later today? Any insights?
I actually don't have insight on that one, and so I'm not 100% sure what's happening there. But again, I know that that doesn't have anything to do with Indian country, and I don't think that there's anything that we need to be concerned about there, as there's other dynamics that are likely in play. And from our standpoint at NCAI, we're just going to be doing what we can, as always, to be getting that message out, again, about that trust responsibility and making sure everybody understands the need to modernize the Native American Housing and Self-Determination Act.
Thanks, Lenny. Jackie, Peta, back to you. Of course, you're up in Juneau, Alaska right now, but I know you have worked nationally across Indian country for many years. What do you see as the housing need across Indian country in broad terms?
I think we, even in our own tribal communities, have to reevaluate how we're looking at long-term sustainability. I know tribes have been struggled with, like the NAHASDA funds not being appropriated with the increases that are necessary. And the last couple of years, we did get some increases, and we saw new construction happening, which revitalized a lot of our communities to think beyond just the regular rental programs and to think more about home ownership and building equity, financial stability of our tribal citizens in the midst of that. And that's one of the things this modernization bill actually takes in account for. It changes things like the leasehold interest to 99 years. It recognizes on the Senate version that, to be able to have programs to reach those with a little bit of a higher income level for a portion of your funds so that you could have homeowners, new homeowners programs and other kinds of things to stimulate different ways that we're providing housing. We have to have multiple pronged solutions in Indian country, and the Modernization Act gives us some of those solutions.
All right, thank you, Jackie. And back to you, Lenny. The 21st Century Road to Housing Act, it appears to benefit housing construction in cities. And I want to talk about that because, as we all know, many Native people today now live in urban areas or off reservations. So won't that have a positive benefit for urban Natives? And is there anything in NAHASDA specifically for Native American people who live off reservation in cities or other urban areas?
Well, to the first question regarding the road to housing, we're very glad for the inclusion of Native people and tribal communities and programs of general applicability, as always. That is something that is we're thankful for, and that we see that within the bill. And so I do believe that there is going to be expanded opportunities under that bill, particularly for urban American Indian people. As it relates to NAHASDA, NAHASDA and the formula and the structure that it has is it's a little bit more limited within the geographic areas for the reservation, like for the Indian Housing Block Grant. However, there are things like the Section 184 loans that are much more flexible, and those go by market and by state. And so that provides access to housing with a loan guarantee that's not limited to necessarily geographically to reservations. And so I think it kind of depends on what program you're talking about. And then there are also homeless program opportunities that aren't necessarily limited to geographically to reservations, but that are more applicable to just the status of being an American Indian, and tribes are able to set those eligibility criteria. And so that's really what we're looking for when we're talking about modernization, is being able to create that level of flexibility that's going to meet each individual tribe's need based on where their citizens are located.
1-800-996-2848. We have the phone lines open. We're waiting for some listeners to join our conversation today. We were talking about housing in Indian country. Do you face challenges in your community? Let us know. What is the current housing situation that you face? 1-800-996-2848. Our next guest, Griffin Hagel Forster, joins us now from Anchorage, Alaska, where he is the executive director of the Association of Alaska Housing Authorities. And Griffin, what factors affect housing affordability for Alaska Natives?
Thanks, Sean. Well, before taking this job a couple of years ago, I worked in the northernmost community in the country, actually, in Utqiagvik for the Regional Housing Authority up there for 6 years. And what we always, shared was that, three big factors that affect the affordability are going to be materials, labor, and logistics. And, looking at the Road to Housing Act, I agree with everything Jackie and Lenny said. I especially like the iPhone comparison. I was thinking about that last night, but the last time NAHASDA was reauthorized. And this widened applicability of several of these provisions for tribes is a very good thing, and all Americans should welcome this kind of progress. But I do think there's this temptation sometimes to fall into this type of thinking that if we create something that might have public housing entities or municipalities or maybe more urban type of recipients in mind, and then create a tribal version of that or an eligibility provision for tribal entities, then we're being fully inclusive of tribes. And as we know with NAHASDA, it is really designed from the ground up for tribes. And one of its main beauties as a piece of public policy is its elegant simplicity. There's this, kind of natural flexibility and inherent efficiency that comes with the principle of self-determination, which gives, our members up here in Alaska working to build affordable housing that true flexibility they need to make it happen on their own terms.
Griffin, you mentioned the higher construction and materials cost as being a huge factor there for housing in Alaska. And the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, it does not include funding. So how can that issue be addressed, these higher construction and materials costs, it being such a big barrier to home ownership for so many people?
Yeah, and just to give you one example of this, I think a 2x4 maybe in Seattle is $3.50, $4 these days. Up here in Anchorage would be maybe $4 to $5. Jackie and I were in a remote community in southwestern Alaska last summer with HUD secretary and senior leadership, and we were able to show, make a trip to the hardware store there where a 2x4 was $13. So just to give listeners a sense of scale of the costs we're talking about in these last mile areas off the road system in Alaska, and fortunately, we've seen funding remain steady and thankfully increase with appropriations for the Indian Housing Block Grant in the last 3 fiscal years. But there's a lot of provisions in NAHASDA modernization specifically, and that are aimed at lightening the administrative load. One of my favorite ones that's in both versions of the bill is streamlined reporting requirements. And I look at the Road to Housing Act, and I was having this conversation with a member the other day. There's a lot of good stuff in there, right? There's opportunities for our members to work with their jurisdictions or, work with other partners and develop these things. But that's also it's a time commitment and another obligation for them. And it's probably another reporting process. It's another federal form, it's another format. And it requires a grant management footprint to increase that is just not at the scale of what a lot of our members operate at. And just to give you a sense of that, we've our largest members just over 200 staff, and we have smallest members with probably under 10. And so, and then there's many tribes who, with their own housing programs, that may have even fewer staff than that. So the capacity to even pursue new benefits in these provisions in a bill like Road is going to be very limited. And that's back to the beauty of NAHASDA, where you have this simplicity. You have one block grant program that is flexible among these eligible activities within a certain defined sandbox, if you will. And then, you have NAHASDA modernization, which is really a reimagined take on reauthorization, coming along saying, hey, for these other, HUD programs that may exist that tribes are eligible for, we can fit these into our current, reporting systems and protocols and save time and administrative burden. There's a lot of good stuff in there about streamlining environmental reviews and making sure that the housing entity itself can be the authority to accomplish those, and just saves a lot of the legwork. There's a great provision in there that expands a successful model of partnering with the military that one of our members did a couple of years ago. And they were able to bring 39 tons of construction materials in on C-130s to a couple of remote communities for no cost. And so that the version of that provision talks about expanding these collaborative, forward-looking opportunities between federal agencies and community partners. And there's a lot of stuff that's tailored for tribes in there. Yeah.
Sweeping legislation just approved by Congress promises to lower the cost of housing across the country. We will continue this conversation on the other side of this break.
Tribal Development Partners, helping tribes build toward their goals through 105L leasing and essential facility development, empowering sovereignty, strengthening community. More at tribaldevpartners.com, proud supporters of this show.
Need help identifying community priorities? Kaufman & Associates' approach to evaluation is rooted in Indigenous knowledge, honoring tribal history, and sovereignty. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. We are talking about housing affordability and access today. Still time if you would like to join our conversation with comments and questions. Just pick up your phone and call 1-800-996-2848. 1-800-996-2848. One of our guests today, Griffin Hagel Forster, is the Executive Director of the Association of Alaska Housing Authorities. And Griffin, going back to NAHASDA, Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski introduced a bill to reauthorize NAHASDA in March. What is the status of that effort?
There was an attempt, I believe, to have a hearing in June of the Indian Affairs Committee that had to be rescheduled. We're expecting more news on that in July. And, really the interim period, we're having conversations around the country, conversations like this one, making sure that we are reaching out to, partners both inside and beyond Indian country to make sure we educate everybody on the importance of this bill. And I think with the road to housing news, that means the ground shifts a little bit underneath this. And as Jackie said, really heightens the urgency of getting this across the finish line. So that's a lot of the conversations that we're having right now, both within Alaska, with our counterparts in regions across the country, and then with aligned entities beyond Indian country.
Griffin, what are your thoughts? with how Nahasda has been stalled for so long. It doesn't appear to be gaining a lot of traction even now.
Yeah, so I've been in this sector for 8 years now in tribal housing, and it hasn't been reauthorized for years going back to that. It's almost half of the time the bill has been around, the 30 years since authorization has lapsed. I think the approach taken now of modernization, of recognition that the tools that are within the bill do need to be brought into the 21st century, and you see that in the title of the full title of the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. There is a growing appreciation that the way that we built housing in the 20th century is not going to necessarily get us to where we need to go in the 21st century. So, I remain a perennial optimist. I really am grateful for the folks, our congressional colleagues who have championed this bill tirelessly, who have thought differently about, where we find ourselves in 2026 and what we need to get it across the finish line. Watching Jackie and the other members of the Tribal Advisory Committee, work with HUD and Congress on this has been fantastic as an experience. So, we're motivated. We're hopeful. I think I see Road as an opportunity to highlight the reasons Indian country needs its own, housing bill, and this is the time to get it done.
Griffin, that's an intriguing insight you share. Being what worked with building homes last century isn't necessarily going to work moving forward. And I'd like some clarification in terms of what is the future of housing, affordable housing. I'm thinking construction types. I'm thinking materials costs. And I'm also curious to know, it's no secret. We've done a lot of shows with regard to climate change in Alaska and some of the flooding and the challenges that it's created for housing in some communities. Does Nahasda have any resources to address some of those issues?
I think a lot of the resources in Nahasda are focused on the program in the bill are the programmatic improvements. But I've told folks for years going back that if you care about climate change and housing resilience or energy efficiency or manufactured housing or any of these other kind of frontiers in housing innovation, Nahasda is the perfect bill for this because its flexibility lets the local tribal community and leadership determine what is best for their needs. So you'll have recipients who are doing a lot of energy efficiency related work with it, maybe climate adaptation and mitigation for changing terrestrial processes that we have up here in Alaska, as you mentioned, a lot of flooding and erosion and permafrost thaw. We certainly saw that up on the North Slope of Alaska when I worked there. So I think Nahasda is just inherently a good tool in that it has that flexibility to meet a variety of interests and needs.
Griffin, one of the interesting priorities in the bill is it's going to redefine what qualifies as a manufactured home. And that's something that interests me a lot because we see a lot of manufactured housing in Indian country in the Southwest where I'm from. How about in Alaska? Do you see a lot of that? And if so, is that priority going to benefit folks with changing how manufactured homes are defined?
I think it's a really interesting opportunity, and there's growing interest. We just had a member build a manufactured triplex out in the community of Nome. We had our membership able to tour a modular building plant that's owned by one of the Alaska Native corporations here in the state back in January. And, kind of putting together our inventory, if you will, of, what does the supply chain look like for that? And you raise a really interesting point, too, that, we're not where we were in 2008 or even before then with our workforce, and there's probably not a realistic way out of the housing crunch we're in as a nation. And certainly to an extent that applies in Indian country without greater uptake of off-site, modular, and manufactured housing approaches. We have a great organization up here, an institution that I serve on the board of called the Cold Climate Housing Research Center that is a partner in a lot of these discussions and validating different construction approaches. So we're having that conversation, and I think a lot of our peers around Indian country are as well. I always say that I work for 15 of the most diligent, innovative resourceful people I know in the state of Alaska, and you really have to be if you're in affordable housing in the 21st century. You've got to get creative.
All right, thank you, Griffin. We're going to pivot now and bring in another guest who is in Seattle, Washington. Derek Bellegarde is the executive director of the Chief Seattle Club, and he is from the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, and he is also Chippewa Cree. Derek, good morning, and welcome back to Native America Calling.
Good morning, Sean. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we touched a little bit earlier in the conversation with regard to housing needs for urban Native people, and Chief Seattle Club has been working to create affordable housing for the urban Native community there in that region. It started with the opening of a big facility. Give us an update on how these projects have impacted the community.
Yeah, so Chief Seattle Club, our focus really is on the chronic single adult homelessness population within our Native community. So we have a lot of work to do on the broader homelessness, housing insecurity issue. But since the last time we spoke, when we opened up our first building of 80 units, we've added 4 more buildings to our portfolio. So today we have 5 permanent supportive housing projects totaling 423 units. They're all single studio units and targeting, chronically single adult. We're doing the best we can. Homelessness and housing insecurity continues to rise, but we're doing the best we can. But we need a lot more buildings and a lot more family buildings coming online in the near future if we're going to solve this. Native Americans here in the Seattle area have the highest disparities when it comes to homelessness and housing insecurity and housing affordability issues. So we have a lot of work ahead of us.
Derek, when we had you on the show last year, there was a lot of turmoil, uncertainty for federal affordable housing money. Has that dust settled recently?
No, because of the uncertainty is still there. And because of that, it's people, and not just even in the Native community, that are trying to build housing and trying to do wonderful things. It's throughout everybody providing affordable housing. It's kind of a little timid, and the uncertainty of continuing service dollars, of keeping our buildings going and running, and subsidies and those things, it's really slowing down. So the dust it's still there. I mean, the fear and, the danger, the risk of increasing buildings without operating dollars is the reality.
Derek, NAHASDA does not apply to the Chief Seattle Club's work. What is the main source and the main driver of the work that you do?
It's mainly, there's 2 ways. We've done a couple of our buildings in our portfolio. We've gotten LIHTC, low-income housing tax credits, which helped, really get the buildings up and going, and the majority. Other ones we've done, a lot of state, city, and county dollars to help us acquire some of our buildings. The rest.
Could you do work in rural places if you wanted to at some point?
Yeah, we definitely haven't ruled that out, but obviously, our flagship in our history has always been in the Seattle area, in Pioneer Square. Really, that's really kind of our headquarters. We have 3 buildings now right in that location, but it's definitely not out of the possibility for us in the future. We know there's many needs through in the surrounding Greater Seattle area, where there is some more rural areas, and but so it's definitely a possibility.
And the Road to Housing bill, does that help your efforts?
We'll see. I mean, we don't have no immediate future to try to acquire any more buildings for a while, but we're just kind of on pause. We're playing it out to see, like when you talk about that dust settling. We want to be prepared to hit the gas and go full steam ahead. We were on target to get to functional zero and chronic single adult homelessness by 2029, but not that, with the uncertainty of what's happening at the federal level, we put it on pause. But that's definitely our long-term goal, is to solve the housing, homelessness, and housing insecurity crisis in our community, both at the single adult level and also eventually family housing.
Now, the King County Regional Homelessness Authority just released its annual count of unsheltered individuals. Can you tell us what types of data it discovers or suggests or reveals about Native Americans experiencing homelessness in the county?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. We're not very happy or pleased with the data that they put out, released yesterday. According to their data, our homelessness rate in our Native community dropped 11% in the last 6 years, in 2020. 2020 is the last bit of data that we actually value and that we think had the real true picture of what it was. And each time they've done that point in time count, it's been getting progressively worse. And the methodology they use is really kind of excludes our community. We've talked about it for years, and it seems to have fallen on deaf ears. But yeah, so it claimed yesterday that it was 4.2% of the homelessness here in the Seattle area, and we know in 2020 it was 15%. So, and every other data point has gone up for other communities, and overall homelessness and housing insecurity has gone up and increased, and ours dropped at 11%. We know there's one of the biggest contributors is the fact that if somebody's doing the putting their information in and they say they hit multiple races, you get erased, right? You get put in a mixed race category. That's part of it, but that's part of that erasure that's been we get attacked with constantly over the decades and centuries of just cultural genocide, of just kind of like hiding the true disparity. And it's just unfortunate. We're very upset about it. What we want is the elected powers that be, policymakers, department heads, funders to really stop and think about this and think about how they're collecting data, because there's communities that are suffering, are greatly impacted by this, and it's just not showing the true picture.
How so? Inaccuracy with this data, how will it impact the work that the Chief Seattle Club does with affordable housing? And again, some of these families and individuals who are in such desperate need of shelter.
Well, that's just it. We're going to have to actually, work harder now and actually go out there and fight this and try to figure out how we can actually get some true, accurate numbers out there, because it does have an impact. When people start they're reading a story in a paper or something about these numbers, and they're actually minimizing the actual disparity, it looks like, people start thinking, well, the problem's starting to get solved. We don't have to really focus so much on this. Now we can go towards this direction or that direction. But in reality, we're still suffering at the highest level out of all the communities. And so, yeah, I mean, it feels like we have more work thrown on us now because of this.
Derek, going back to those 423 units that you folks have recently been able to offer to individuals there in the community, can you share any stories, any specific examples of people who have been able to move in and really make progress with regard to their housing needs and other aspects of their lives?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of great success stories, a lot of people who have actually gone on to, go into school, gotten jobs, even gotten vehicles. And, we have some tenants that I know that are like do Uber, and things like that. So, and they, come from literal homeless, street homeless, most vulnerable, suffering, and then get housed, and they can actually start, get some safety and security. They can start better in their lives and start actually doing things that actually are rewarding to them, whether it's going to school or whether it's getting, a job or a better job, or, eventually moving on to out of PSH into a more affordable housing, or even onto market rate. Right. So there's a lot of examples.
And do you meet a lot of folks that are interested in that at some point, maybe going on and getting a 30-year fixed mortgage and buying a single-family home, maybe in one of the suburbs? I know costs aren't cheap, but it certainly would be something to aspire to.
It definitely is something to aspire to, but the reality is there's a lot of healing we got to do. Our population, our target population is the most vulnerable, the most suffering. People with whether it's mental health or substance or both, just trauma throughout the life, going through foster care, incarceration, or different things. And so there's a lot of trauma to unpack. There's a lot of work we have to do, a lot of healing that has to be done. So housing, what we always said at Chief Seattle Club, is just the first step. We can't actually start addressing some of these needs until you actually have the safety and security of a roof over your head, and a safe roof over your head, culturally appropriate for us.
We're out of time, so we're going to have to wrap up this conversation. But before we go, I want to thank all of our guests who joined us today. Derek Bellegarde, Jackie Peda, Lenny Feinday, and Griffin Hagel-Forster. Join us back here tomorrow when we look at the drive to separate the province of Alberta from the rest of Canada. Traditional Indigenous leaders say their voices are not included in that process. I'm Sean Spruce. You've been listening to the one, the only Native America Calling. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
faculty of tribal colleges and universities support their students in countless ways. They say I believe and offer help before it's asked.
Hear that? That's everything tribal college faculty do for their students on Fast Forward. Because if one tried to say it in real time, they'd be here all day. They teach, guide, comfort, and connect. And for that, the community is grateful. Learn more at mostthoroughdjobdescription.com. The American Indian College Fund supports this program.
They give extensions, share progress, share laughter, create calm, and allow reflection. They inspire hope, share wisdom, guide gently, validate feelings.
Grand Canyon Conservancy fosters visitor engagement with the landscape through learning, discovery, and stewardship. The Grand Canyon Conservancy Field Institute provides immersive and educational adventures designed in partnership with Grand Canyon National Park, including day hikes for the family, once-in-a-lifetime backpacking trips, and art classes with expert instructors. More at grandcanyon.org. Grand Canyon Conservancy supports this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.